Hi everyone. I'm not sure if everybody has joined yet, but I will wait. I will give them another 30 seconds and then we'll start. But as a preamble, I would say first, I'm incredibly pleased to have a chance to exchange with all of you. The idea is to give you not a whole overview of the company, but it's going to be more update mode because most of the people already know us, even though I will use the traditional corporate presentation as well as a major material as well, but I will focus mostly on all the latest news for the past, since the beginning of the year, but mainly for the past quarter. So we'll wait another 10-15 seconds and we'll get started. Okay, I will start now. So the idea, this will be a 25 minutes to 30 minutes presentation, and I will leave time for all of you to ask questions at the end of the presentation, and I will respond to them at the end of the presentation as much as I can, given the time we have. And then this webcast will also be on our website by the end of the day today, so you can always listen to it again if you want at the end of the day. Okay, so I'll start now. So this is just as a small recap, but you all more or less know this, but to really explain where median comes from. And it's really the idea of trying to get insight from medical images. So to be able to understand the signal and where the signal corresponds in terms of disease state. So typically, can we identify the signal in the image that correspond to lung cancer? Can we identify the signal in the image that correspond to liver cancer? Can we come up with predictive model on who could respond or not respond to therapy, for example? So this is, of course, absolutely crucial for all our client base, being it pharma or for patient care, to get the ability to develop better drug and to better treat and monitor cancer patients. The technology is really based on artificial intelligence, computer vision, image processing, and this is things we have been doing for years now. So it's not something we've been trying to reinvent ourselves. It's something that is the core DNA of Median. We don't develop technology for the sake of developing technology. The only purpose is to answer an unmet medical need. And for that purpose, we work with very strong key opinion leaders all over the world. So it's both key opinion leaders in the medical field, scientific field, and different type of technology field as well. We have grown tremendously in the past 3 years. If I'm not mistaken, we were 90 people a few years ago, 3 years ago. We're 230 today. We still have a very strong base in Europe. We have a very strong base also in China. We have more than 50 people now in China, and the business has been growing substantially. And we have also our office in Boston, the US, with many employees scattered around the US. And that's where we would expect in the coming years to have the biggest growth, actually. It should be relatively even between the 3 continents, probably within the next 12 months or so. With all this, we develop different type of services and products that you most know, and I will give you all the updates respective the 2 main part of the business. So for ICRO, if you remember, it's delivering imaging services in the course of oncology trials, and for that purpose, we work with some of the biggest pharma in the world and some of the biggest biotechs in the world. iBiopsy, so ICRO is a service business. iBiopsy is, we develop products, software as medical devices that will target both our pharma clients. So we already engaged into many discussions with our pharma clients, but also for patient care for the daily treatment and assessment of cancer patients in clinical routine settings. So in iBiopsy, the difference with ICRO is that this is a pure software model. It's a software as a service model. It's an algorithm that sits in the cloud that processes an image and sends a report back. Contrary to ICRO, where ICRO, we have project managers, we have image managers, we have radiologists. So it's a different type of margin levels as well. So iBiopsy as a software as a service will be, closer to 80-85% type of gross margin. So here to show you some of the key figures for the year and for the past quarter. So in Q3, we continue to have a very strong quarter. I call it very strong quarter, even though you know, it was the growth was 13% compared to Q3 of last year. Even if it's, and I've had questions in the past saying, you know, how come it's down compared to Q2? Well, Q3 is always cyclical, you know. Of course, it's summertime, so both, you know, China, Europe, and the US, it's always historically much slower than the others. Furthermore, I would say in Q2, which was an exceptional quarter, was really related to one very, very big client who asked us to expedite a whole set of read that came all into that quarter, and that created a big boost in terms of revenue generation for Q2. So Q3 was a very good quarter for us, and clearly even higher than we had initially budgeted given the context. You can see that our backlog have started to increase again, and quite substantially compared to Q3 of last year. We expect that to continue in the coming weeks and coming quarters, sorry. And I will give you some more insight on what could be expected there. Our cash and cash equivalent is around 26 million at the end of Q3. So here, you know, without giving any top secrets, you know, what this means is you can all see the type of burn rate we have. This means that we have 18 to 20 months of cash in front of us. That means that, you know, clearly we're not pressed to raise money tomorrow, and we can try to see how the market evolved if we do need cash. But at this stage, we're, you know, reasonably comfortable, I would say. A quick recap on iBiopsy. As you know, this is what we call the new generation of non-invasive diagnostic compared to an invasive procedure like biopsy that cannot be scaled on a wide population. You have only two types of non-invasive diagnostics. It's imaging and liquid biopsy, really. Imaging comes in at each and every stage of a patient journey. Can be, you know, in the course of a screening program. It can be for regular diagnosis of a patient, or the monitoring of a patient who is under treatment. So we do that, as you know, for two main indications, and I'll give you all the news on those, which is lung cancer and liver cancer. But we do that also for NASH, and I'll give you news on that as well. It's a very, very important quote that is listed here that is not from myself. It's one of the most famous oncologists in the world. And it's really to say something that is at the core of what Median is doing too, is to help diagnose at the early stage, at the stage where it can be treated. If it's one thing we really know about cancer, and I've said this many, many times, and it's probably almost the only thing we do really know, is that it's a direct correlation between the stage of the disease and the capacity to save the patient. So providing early stage diagnosis is absolutely crucial for all cancer patients. But it's not only that, it's been recognized. You know, this is not me saying it. This is based on epidemiological studies that have been performed around the world. So it's a huge, huge trend coming towards exactly what Median is trying to develop. So here to give you news on what's happening on our lung cancer screening program. So just as a brief recap, this is, you know, like most cancer, it's a very tragic cancer. It's very aggressive. Unfortunately, most patients do not get any symptoms. By the time they have symptoms, it's a very advanced stage of the disease. And for patients who are diagnosed in the late stage, you have 94% death rate within 5 years, which is of course very, very dramatic. Now, while we position ourselves here, and I will, you know, reiterate that, is this big studies have shown that 92% of the patients are alive after 15 years if they've been diagnosed in stage 1. Can you imagine the impact going from 94% death rate to 92% survival rate? So it's totally unheard of. It's never happened in the history of cancer that you can have such a wide impact. So this is why you have now 15 million people eligible for lung cancer screening in the US. I'll remind you, last year was 7 million, so they've doubled the cohort. Everything is based on imaging, and it's low-dose CT. It's exactly what we do. So there's no other thing that is being reimbursed for that. And one of the big issue to be able to scale this has been the generation of what is called false positive. False positive is when you identify something in the image, but you don't know if it's a cancer or not. So to give you an explanation on that, it's just that imaging traditionally is very good at finding things. The issue is we don't see the genetic information or cellular information. So how can we tell if this is really cancer or not? Well, these are everything we showed, in the first part of the year, and I give you a quick recap on the studies we performed. What I will say also, it was announced 6 weeks ago by the European community that they made it one of the top healthcare priorities for the next cancer plan for Europe to include a lung cancer screening program. This was announced 6 weeks ago. They plan to have a pilot to start within the next coming months. You have already 2 countries who have started to do that, one full scale, one as a pilot, which is Croatia and Greece. The intent for the European community is to generalize this for all EU countries within the next coming years, which would be ideal for us because that will be the time, hopefully by the time we will get the product out on the market as well. South Korea have started to implement it. It's a huge healthcare issue, of course, in China and Japan as well. So it's a worldwide issue. I will remind you that it's a #1 killer of all cancer and kills more than the next 3 combined. So as a quick reminder, this is what we showed in the early part of the year. This is our capacity to both detect and characterize lung lesions. So to detect and characterize cancer, can we identify the cancers, the potential cancers for patients, and do that with a certain degree of certainty? And this is what we proved in the early part of the year, which to my mind is a total game changer, and that is totally unparalleled at this stage. Now this study was done basically based on a retrospective study. It was a huge study, 1,700 patients, 16,000 lung nodules, providing some, totally unheard of performance, and I'm not shy to say that. This is to show you how we compare to the competition. So anywhere you look at it, it's only one group who've been able to do characterization called Optellum. And you can see our performance is way, way ahead of Optellum in terms of specificity. So, to have a 28% chance of telling a patient has cancer is pretty low probability. So of course, when we come with 93%, it's a huge game changer. I'm not going to say anything bad about any of my competitors. I love to see them because it allows us to be compared next to them on very objective measurement, which is based on the performance. And the performance is, I've already gone through that in the past, but it's a function of sensitivity and specificity. So sensitivity, you try to avoid false negative. You're trying to avoid missing somebody who has a cancer. In specificity, you try to avoid the false positive, so people who don't have cancer. So, and it's a conjunction of the 2 figures that give you the power of it. But we're the only one who've done the integration of both the detection, which is all the upper part of this slide, all the riverine infravision and so on. They do only detection. Optellum is doing at this stage only characterization. We only do the one who do both. So a very interesting news for everyone here and for us also. It's, as you know, our business model for lung cancer screening is to promote a reimbursed procedure. Like, we will be looking at getting a reimbursement code for the value we provide to the healthcare system and to patients. So we don't intend to sell licenses. We might do that in the early stage until we get the reimbursement code, but the idea is to really negotiate a reimbursement code, just like you get a reimbursement code when you do a lab test or any type of diagnostic test for that matter. And for many years, payers have had a hard time really giving reimbursement code to imaging procedures because it was perceived as the job of the radiologist. And second, AI was something that was not scary, it was unknown to many people. So they felt it was uncharted territory, basically. Now, in the past year, you've had many, many groups who've received now reimbursement codes for AI applied to radiology. The latest one is actually our competitor, Optellum. So they have received what is called a CPT3 code. So this is what the first code they give, and this is negotiated with Medicare and CMS in the US, which is all the healthcare coverage for people who have retired. And then you have all the private payer who use that as a benchmark. And the benchmark is usually Medicare, CMS have the lowest rate of reimbursement, and then you have the private payers who come in, and most of the time they give a premium to that reimbursement. The way it works is that you get a CPT-3 code, which is an interim code valid for 3 years, for which you have to gather real-life evidence data to have a permanent code after these 3 years. They received a reimbursement of $650, which is absolutely huge. You know, no matter which way you turn it, it's huge. In the US, the CT scanner, you know, the lung cancer screening procedure itself is already reimbursed at $150. This is $650 for their procedure. So of course, this was very good news to us because it's setting a precedent in something very close to what we want to do. So we're going to be looking at either piggybacking on the code, because the code is not specific to a company, it's specific to a procedure. So we would either piggyback on their code or look at getting our own code, since we do more with a higher performance. So, you know, we would have absolutely a reasonable claim to try to get a higher reimbursement rate. We will look at doing this in parallel to the clinical validation we're doing with the FDA. So it's not like we're going to be waiting to receive the FDA approval to engage with payers for the reimbursement code. Our initial plan, and this is, you know, still quite early stage to discuss it, because we engage with you know, different consultants to really set up the proper right strategy for the US. What I'm talking about is mainly the US. And we would hope or plan to get the reimbursement by a reimbursement code in place within 1 or 2 quarters of the FDA approval, because we'll do it in parallel. Otherwise, it's like an 18 months process, but we think we will be able to get it within 1/4 to 2 quarters from the FDA approval. So to me, I view this as extremely good news. This is very, very recent. This happened for Telum, I think it was the first week of September, so it's absolutely recent, and it's really setting a very nice precedent for us. I'll remind you very quickly, because it's been a huge hype all over Europe based on, you know, liquid biopsies, and this is the latest publication from the 3 main groups looking at doing, you know, early stage detection for lung cancer. So you can see that the results are at this stage extremely poor. But I'm not going to, again, I'm not here to denigrate any of them. I think they're doing some phenomenal science that could be relevant to patients over time, but not for early stage. You know, ctDNA does not shed in the blood for early stage cancer, so it's not really a question of science at this stage. But they could have a very big relevance for the monitoring of cancer patients to look at the recurrence of cancer. And you know, we have very good relationship with most of these guys too. This is to show you our Gantt chart with some more detail than what we have showed to you in the past. So as you know, we have made a filing for what is called a Q-sub with the FDA. So that stands for question submission. We have filed, you know, the type of claims we want to do. We have made a proposal for a specific clinical study, for which they are getting back to us with comments. And I have to say, at this stage, it's a very constructive discussion we're having with the FDA. They're very, I would say, constructive and really helpful. So really to try to basically guide us the best way possible, both for our study and the whole regulatory process. So at this stage, I would claim it's really moving forward in a nominal way. They have already made comments to our study, which is based on the type of predicate we want to use. As a reminder, we will do a filing to compare us with something that already exists, so they have a point of reference. That's why they call it 510K, compared to a de novo application where you start from scratch and you have something that nobody has done in the past. So the de novo application is more complex, takes a longer time, versus a 510K, which is a quicker process because they can compare it to something existing. So they have proposed a predicate to us. we have discussed with them the clinical protocol, and we're in the process of finding full alignment with them, and that's proceeding very nicely at this stage. So once the pivotal study have started, we have also, more or less finalized the recruitment of all the sites we're going to be working with, and the recruitment of all the patients we need to have enrolled in the trial. We're also discussing all the statistical analysis we will be doing with the FDA to see that they're happy with the number of patients that will participate in the trial. And I'll remind you that we will do that for with both US patients and European patients. This is to make sure that the study will do can be used both for an FDA approval and for the CE mark. You can see here, and mentioned that, of course, in the past you've seen this before. CE mark comes at a later stage because it's a different type of procedure for Europe. They've just very recently totally changed their guideline procedures, which is why it takes longer time than FDA approval. But still, that should be quite good news because it should probably match the time it will start to get scaled in European countries. So it should be really good. What you can see here that is we have added a whole new line that we call IDPN. IDPN stands for Incidental Detected Pulmonary Nodule. Incidental findings is basically when a patient goes to have a scanner, but not for the lung. He had another condition, maybe a cardiac issue or broken rib, and the radiologist discover a lung nodule. Well, this is a huge healthcare issue because you have 2 million patients like this diagnosed in Europe every year, and around the same about the same in the US. But you cannot go and do biopsies on millions and millions of people. So these people are being monitored, which is a huge healthcare issue because if you ask a patient to come back in 1 year's time to see if the nodule has grown or not, which will tell you if it's cancer or not, for example, well, that patient might have moved from a stage 1 to stage 2 cancer. If you move from stage 1 to stage 2, it's a totally different disease, and the chance of survival are not the same at all. So it's been a huge push from all our medical advisory board as well. You've probably seen that we announced in August our new medical advisory board. I would claim we're incredibly lucky to have the quality of medical advisory board as we have. It's some of the who's who in the world in terms of both lung cancer, but both from a radiological perspective, oncologist and pulmonologist. And they felt that for them in a day-to-day operation, treating the IDPN, it's a different category from lung cancer screening. Most of the people discovered incidentally will not have been found in a lung cancer screening program. It's usually younger people who will not qualify for the screening. It's many women as well, and it's often non-smokers. So it's a very important part of the population. And also they have a higher prevalence of cancer than in the lung cancer screening population. So it's a huge issue. The very, very good news for us, of course, is that it's a huge increase in the total addressable market that we can address directly with our solution. It's a separate line here because we have to do a separate filing towards the FDA. HCC and NASH, you can see how we are moving forward. So here again, we were showing some result of the data during the course of next year for both of them, well, mainly for HCC. And it's the same type of regulatory process that we have to do for these two as we're doing for lung cancer screening or IDPNs. It's basically following the traditional route of to get the software's medical device out on the market. One thing I will say is that we are looking at potentially monetizing all this work before it gets FDA approval for a very good reason. When we showed, these results to, when we produced these results, the first one to call us were big pharma because they had a huge need to be in a position to identify early stage patients to enroll in the trial. They all know that the drugs they develop works much better for early stage patients and very poorly for late stage patients. And the big issue for them is how can we identify these patients? So it's a huge need for pharma to both be in a position to identify these patients at early stage, meaning they're moving more into the adjuvant and neoadjuvant space, and also to be in a position to identify these patients in real life. Once a drug is out on the market, to be able to treat them. And this would, could really contribute to make cancer a chronic disease where you can save the patient's life versus, unfortunately, at this stage, giving treatment to patients who will still die. On the I0 part of the business, so here again, you remember it's a 1.5 billion annual market. You have the three big players, Icon, Calyx, Clario, who are probably at this stage controlling something, it's difficult to get the exact figure, but say, around 35-40% of market share. The biggest player, Clario, was created through the acquisition of a company called Bioclinica. It was acquired for 32 times revenues last year for $7.8 billion. What I can safely say is that where we feel very optimistic compared to these three is that we come from a very different background. We come from, how to deploy technology to really extract the most meaningful information from the images, whereby I have huge respect again for these three guys. They're doing a very good job, otherwise they wouldn't be where they are. But we come from a very different place. We can provide insight on how to select patient for the trial. We can provide insight on how does the mechanism of the drug really work. If you look at all the press release from big pharma, and I'm saying it's close to 100% of all the big pharma, they're all saying that they're going to invest massively in artificial intelligence to better understand how the drugs are working and for the selection of patients. Well, that's the core business for Median. These people, they provide what I call plain vanilla services. We can do the same level of service, I would claim, with at least as good, if not better quality as well. At least that's what we're hearing from clients, clearly. But we provide something much more, which is, what we introduced in the summer of this year. You probably saw the press release, and this is, to us, huge when we announced this. So this is the creation of the imaging lab. It's how to provide a very strong differentiator towards our pharma clients. As I said, in January, when we showed the result for lung cancer screening, the people who called us immediately were big pharma. If you look at it, the biggest promoter of lung cancer screening worldwide are people like AstraZeneca, Roche, Merck, J&J. They all promoting and spending huge amounts of money to promote lung cancer screening. Simple reason, they need it. They need to identify these patients to put them under treatment at a time where the drug will really work. And we have started to be approached, by some of the biggest pharma in the world, totally independently initially from the ICO business. So it's people that are not our clients from the ICO side, and who are coming to us to say, well, we've seen what you can do applying AI to medical images. Clearly there is a huge interest from lung cancer screening. But what this is all the points that have a huge interest for them. It's selection of patients. Typically, help us find early stage patients for lung cancer and liver cancer. I'll remind you also that lung cancer is the #1 killer of all cancers, kills more than the next three combined, basically. And liver cancer is the #3 currently, and but the fastest growing. It's already the #2 in Asian countries, and it's likely to become #2 soon in Europe and the US. And they all need to be able to catch these patients early. Prediction of response to therapy. We're very well placed to know that. We're currently managing something like 220 clinical trials, half of them for targeted therapy, half of them for immuno-oncology. The average response rate for these patients is around 25 to 30% at best. That means 70 to 75% of patients do not respond to treatment. So payers and regulators are putting a huge pressure on pharma to say, show us who it works on. And for that purpose, they need to have a better understanding of the mechanism of action of the drug. And we've been approached by many groups now to start to look at this. What this means is that the natural discussion we're having with them, they're saying, well, if you're going to be working with us on AI-related, more IBIOPSY type of issues, it seems totally natural that you should manage our images in the course of clinical trial using ICRO, because then you can have our data to work on, in-house. So what I'm going to say is, what we would expect in the course of 2023, and it all takes time to scale. If you remember, we announced last year the signature of the biggest oncology pharma in the world with the biggest pipeline. We won that contract in October of last year, and it was for a certain amount of indication for solid tumors. It really started to come into motion, within a 6 months lag period. The 6 months is really quite natural. It's by the time they assign a new contract to us, it can sometimes take 6 months before the first patient comes into the trial. But also the impact on the order book comes at a later stage, because it's a natural transition period from the people they've been working with in the past to hand over the new stuff to us. So, I'm not going to give any names or real indications here, but we're in discussion with many very, very big pharma for the purpose of working with them on exactly the type of issues that you can see on the screen here that is leading to, the ICO business. So this is what I was telling all of you guys a year ago that I was hoping would happen. We were more in a concept mode at the time because we had not started to produce any real figures on iBiopsy, which we have now with the lung cancer screening. And I can tell you that really hits home with big pharma, because they can see the type of result we've had can probably be replicated as well in different types of indication too. So it's, we would expect to see, starting Q2, Q3 next year, having some very, very positive impact for the order book as well. So the order book the backlog is still continuing to go at a nice pace, but we would expect a really strong pace starting Q2, Q3 next year as well. Just as a sort of reminder, we have now, which is quite remarkable, we have 10 drugs that we've worked with that have been supported for regulatory approval, which is huge type of success rate of the drug we've been working on. So it says 213 here, but it's more than 220 now trials that we've been involved with. The biggest growth have been in phase 3 trials, which is a good news because that's why we have the biggest ticket items as well. And it's, if you remember, it's been quite big traction on the Chinese side. It was a bit less traction in the US for a while. We would expect to reach a much more stable or even between the 3 continents we're working with, starting Q2 next year, where that it should be probably quite even between the US, Europe, and Asia. And it's not because China is going to be not growing as much, it's because we expect stronger growth, particularly in the US in the coming years. This, I mentioned this was a big contract we won last year. What I can say is that in September, so just a few weeks ago, they decided to increase the scope of the studies they're giving to us. So after a year, initially they gave us the management of all the major phase 3 trials for certain indications, for major indications. Now they have expanded that to a whole range of new indication as well, which is of course huge sign of credibility and should also start to have an impact soon on the backlog. Again, and I will finish with this and I will look at your questions, is on the ICO side. I think, it's been, we've had some impact on the lockdown in China, clearly. The impact have been, on 2 parts. For our Chinese team, it's been very, very hard because, we've all gone through lockdowns here, but for them to continue after all this time when they all know that it's not having any major health impact has been very hard. But and for our clients, it's been some impact as well, where, for typically when Shanghai was locked down, they couldn't recruit patients in Shanghai. It was not too bad. It was, we had some impact clearly, but it was not too bad in the sense that it was not the same type of lockdown as they did in the previous year where the whole country was locked down. This time, it was mainly certain regions that got locked down. So I will try to look at your question here and start to answer some of your question. So here, let me see that. Okay, so some people are saying, well, given the current environment, many biotechs who are facing a very big financial issues. You have lots of biotech, both in Europe and the US, who have less than 1 year of cash. And of course, this is a very big worry for all these biotechs in current environment on how they're going to be able to raise new cash. So, and the question is, do we feel it's going to have an impact on our backlog? So I would claim at this stage, no. We have been very careful. You know, each time when we work with clients, we clearly look at, you know, if they're funded or not funded, and what is the risk of working with specific client to avoid having any type of cancellation based on the lack of funding. So at this stage, we don't have major worries for that. And we have a very strong traction with big pharma and big biotechs who are well funded. So I'm not claiming it will not happen in the future. I don't see any major impact for our backlog. You know, I think we've been able to show that, you know, if you look the past 3 years, you know, we've all gone through COVID. Now we're going through a war in Ukraine, inflation, and major economic issues as well with relating to a relationship with China. Well, even given all these circumstances, we have been able to produce double-digit growth, which, you know, I feel any way you look at it, absolutely not, well, yes, remarkable. So now I don't see at this stage an impact on biotechs. If this starts to impact bigger biotechs, or, you know, because it's mainly small biotechs who are maybe having these issues, if it starts to impact some others, maybe it could have. We haven't seen a downturn coming from big pharma as a sort of complementary to this discussion. You know, do we see big pharma being impacted? No, not at this stage. What we see is what I call a stage shift. So that's what I mentioned earlier. You know, it was a big study that had a huge impact on all pharma, but the trend had started earlier because this trend to really treat early stage patients started basically more than 18 months ago, the shift. But you also, that it's a very big study that was done by, well, a big pharma. I'm not sure if I can name them, but they lost 50 billion market cap in a few days based on the results. Because it was clearly having poor results on late stage patients. So this is, but the trend we're seeing is all across big pharma. So they're repositioning some of their trials, but we don't see a slowdown on the number of trials. Here another question is, how profitable is the iCRO business is at current scale if we exclude iBiopsy expenses? So it is clearly cash generating. We have been, and I don't think I'm allowed to communicate that, but you'll see it at the year-end figures. We've been able to extract much higher margin that we had initially budgeted for this year. So it is clearly cash contributing to the whole Median organization, and of course covering part of the cost as well for iBiopsy. And we expect that not only to continue, but to increase over time. So this is also very good news for us, is that in these, you know, current times, you know, sometimes when the situation gets hard, people fight on prices. But I think it's a recognition also the quality of the work we're doing, that we see from our end at this stage. We've been able to hold our margins and increase them. So how do we see the evolution of the backlog? So that's also related to the first question. So the backlog, as I said, you know, it's very, very interesting for us to see that the big pharma now, who are not clients to us, who were basically even closing the door to us because they're very bureaucratical. So it's not that they don't want to talk to Median, it's that when they have a vendor they work with for the management of the images, you know, usually it's contracts that are firm for the next 3 or 4 years, and they're not going to move from it. And it's not, you know, when it becomes a plain vanilla deal, meaning it's not strategic, it's purely a procurement issue, it's really sometimes hard to penetrate these accounts. Now, what we're doing with iBiopsy and Imaging Lab is creating huge traction. Imaging Lab is really there to serve the purpose of deploying very sophisticated AI solution for pharma. But then we come in a totally different type of discussion. The discussion is led at a very strategic level. I would claim sometimes at the highest level of these big pharma, and absolute highest level. So that allows us to break into the door in a totally different way. So we clearly expect to see, deals coming in from big pharma that will start to generate very, very interesting traction for the ICO backlog. And this is related to, performing work for them on Imaging Lab. The impact will probably be felt, as I mentioned during the course of my presentation, probably starting Q2, Q3 next year, because even if we sign contract with big pharma, by the end of the year, Q1, it's always some lag time before that translates into backlog and revenues. But that would be a very interesting metrics to follow next year, will be the evolution of the backlog, during the whole course of next year. So the relationship with CFDA, I gave some indication, I would claim very, very constructive discussion. And I reiterate that because it's not always been the case. Sometimes companies like us can be very afraid of the discussion we're having with CFDA. It could raise lots of red flags and so on. I would claim they've been very, very helpful to really guide us in the best way possible to really address the whole regulatory process. So I think we were very well prepared. So, kudos to my team here who did a fantastic job. They were all incredibly well prepared. And the discussion going on between our regulatory people and chief medical officer with CFDA is moving forward exactly more or less as we had expected. It's always, we don't determine the timeline for the FDA to get back to us on the meetings we set up with them. So, sometimes it is a lag time, but it's normal. They cover many companies like us. They had a big delay after COVID that they have to try to absorb. So, apart from the fact that sometimes it's a bit longer than expected to get meetings or response from them, otherwise they're very constructive. So what expectation do we have on Q4 revenues? Do you foresee any impact of the macroeconomic on ICO revenue generation? Well, one thing I can say is that I would prefer not to have a war next door. I would prefer to have much less inflation and having a great relationship with China. So one thing I can concentrate on with my team is really continue to perform under the best of our abilities. And I can tell you, everybody here is working close to 24 hours a day. I think we've been doing that with, quite a lot of success. And that's really, if you ask my personal feeling, because I cannot give you, details because we don't provide the guidance, but I've never felt so good about Median almost as I am feeling now. So it doesn't mean it will be felt Q1, Q2 immediately. That means on the build up to really scale something to a larger scale than we had anticipated. I think we're in a very good position. And that's really because of the conjunction of everything we're doing. A few years ago, pharma were not interested, for example, in treating early stage patients. They didn't want us to tell them on which patient the drug will work or not, because they didn't want for us to reduce the market size. And I can relate to that. Now it's totally different. We're 100% aligned with all our pharma partners because they want to find these early stage patients and treat them and make sure we can save these patients. And it's not based on what I'm telling you, it's based on what also regulators and payers are looking for, and everybody's getting fully aligned. So I feel, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm always optimistic. But I would claim, things are, I would claim for the, next year looking very, very positive. So what are the respective part of revenues coming from China, US, and Europe in Q3 revenues? So China is still a dominant factor. I'll remind you that Q1, we had many deals coming in from China. It was, the Q1 order book, new generation of new business was mainly coming from China. And this has an impact on revenues Q3 because you always have the lag time I mentioned to you before as well. So, China Q3 was around 50%, a bit less, 45%. But we expect, as I mentioned, to have both revenue and backlog being more even from continent to continent. Within the next 12 months, it will probably be even. And I repeat, it's not because of a slowdown from China. It's because of more even and more business coming from Europe and coming from the US. One thing I will mention also, which is quite interesting, is that in some way, the geopolitical situation can also be beneficial to media. So I feel sad to say so, because nobody wants to benefit from a sad geopolitical situation, but should feel good about it. But the relationship typically between China and the US have made that the US is now requesting for all Chinese studies to be made on US patients to get registered in the US. So this is having a big impact for Chinese pharma, because most of their studies, they conduct them in China, and they look at doing registration both for China but for the US and Europe. Now, they cannot use these studies for the US and Europe. They will have to redo their studies in these continents. And we should be the natural gateway to work with them in the US and Europe, because we've been managing their studies in China. So we'll see how it plays out. This decision was made by the US FDA and the US government. It goes back to, I think it was April of this year. It didn't impact the short-term studies or people who had already applied, so the impact will start to be felt next year, but could have a positive impact for us. That's it. I think it's most of the questions I have received. So, maybe I would say as a sort of conclusion, what I just said is, I've been looking at, of course, my biggest concern of all is towards all of you, because without the support of our shareholders, we will be doing nothing. I can see some comments sometimes that says I don't communicate enough. I think I'm probably one of the CEOs who communicate the most. Look at how many webinars I've been doing in the past year only. So, and I'm not going to communicate if I have nothing to say either. But then we do regular press release. I think I've been feeling really how to put it, annoyed is a nice word. To looking at the impact on our share price when I see we continue to perform and we're being affected like many other people, but all for the wrong reasons. It's not like we're a binary decision like many other biotechs who don't have any funds, and it's a yes or no for one study going on and so on. So I think the risk level with media is much, much less than almost anything you could find on the market. Furthermore, the healthcare market doesn't get much impacted in any downturn of the economy. People still need to have healthcare. I think what we do is really, really what is being hot on the whole healthcare market. It's AI applied to diagnostic and developing on new drugs and patient monitoring. So our positioning, what we do, the advance we've been able to show should really lead to some good future for Median moving forward. So one thing I say, you can count on me to do everything I can to make sure clearly, if I'm not doing something right, I will try to improve the communication level. Clearly, you have a full dedicated team here at Median to continue to produce a result that we all expect. And if I can concentrate with my team on doing what we can do, which is influence our business, share price should come back to where it should be. So I thank you all for your trust, and I look forward to discussing you in the future. Oh, just one last question. I have one question on the Chinese market for eye biopsies. Is there any regulation blocker? So no, at this stage, clearly China will be a huge, huge market for us regarding eye biopsy. Lung cancer and liver cancer are the two main causes of cancer deaths in China, and the proportion are just huge. The head of the Chinese Society of Radiology that I've met quite a few times, Dr. Liu from Shanghai, so he's the top guy of all radiology in China. His specialty is lung cancer screening, so he's one of the biggest promoters for that to happen in China as well. So it isn't any roadblock for us. It's been a question of focusing first on the US and Europe, China has some other issues we have to deal with, which is more related to IP, but I think this is manageable in today's age and time. It's not like a few years ago where there was lots of issues regarding IP in China. It's better managed today. So we will be looking eventually at going to China. I'm not going to show you a roadmap on China yet, but China could potentially be absolutely huge for us. So I will just thank you all for your trust, and I look forward to talking to you hopefully soon. And thank you a lot for all your trust.